I think we're generations, if ever, away from replicating the human brain and the joys of human life, the emotions of human life.
You're listening to the Building a Coaching Culture podcast. If you need to compete and win in the 21st century labor market as an employer of choice, this podcast is for you. Each week, we share leadership development, coaching, and culture development insights from leading experts who are developing world-class cultures in their own organizations. And now, here's your host, J.R. Flatter.
Hey, welcome back, everybody. It's J.R. Flatter with Lucas. How you doing?
Pretty good. Recovering from a cold, but yeah, just rounding the corner. I feel better today.
All right. So today we wanted to kick off a conversation about generative AI. I'll tell you right up front, I could barely spell AI. So I'm going to rely heavily on you, my computer scientist friend, to talk about AI. So just in a nutshell, let's define what generative AI is. And so AI, artificial intelligence, is exactly that. It's a computer or a series of computers or a database, interrelated computers. I can only envision in my mind where they're drawing their data from. There are several tools out there. Probably the most famous right now, as you and I are talking, is ChatGPT. I think it's up to version 5.0 right now. I'm using version 4.0. But through some complex algorithm, I can query artificial intelligence and it'll give me a response back. And, wherever it might be drawing data from, you would hope is unbiased and coming back to you as factual as possible. When I use AI, I've been using it and I'm in very early stages of even learning how to use AI, but using it to give me thoughts and maybe articulate it something a little clearer than I might have written it. Tend to speak in PhD ease, and I know the rest of the world doesn't. I guess where I was using the right-click synonyms, give me a synonym for that word, I can now just put the sentence into Gen AI and it'll give me back what it thinks might be a clearer way to say that. You can either take it or not. But the artificial intelligence, in addition to, and stop me if I wander astray here, but the artificial intelligence, in addition to responding to my query, is also learning my style of questioning and my style of thinking and writing and all of that. And that's the generative piece of it. It's getting smarter about me. And there's unintended consequences to that, and also very positive consequences to having a partner in writing. And I know you're an artist, so there are images you can create. I'll just give you a quick anecdote of how new I am. I tried to use AI to help me create a logo this morning. And after 20 minutes of trying, it said, "You're out of tries. Check back after 2:00. And I don't know, I pay a subscription, so I don't know what I did to anger the AI gods, but I guess I could jump back in now. It's after 2:00 in the afternoon where you and I are. But I'll pause there and see what your thoughts are as we jump into this very complex topic.
I guess the way that I think about it is it's almost like the monkeys typing Shakespeare kind of problem. Like if you had unlimited amount of time and, unlimited resources, would random text eventually have some sort of meaning? And so what these algorithms are doing is taking, the entirety of human language and based on your prompt, trying to create meaning, so let's take all the words and all the grammar that are possible and try to come back with, a coherent meaning. And a lot of times it might not be your exact intention. 99% of the time it'll sound like actual English language, which is pretty successful. But then sometimes you'll say, oh, you didn't really take into account, the bullets that I provided or, things like that. So I think, on a practical sense, it's, like you're saying, it's a tool that you learn to use over time. What does it do well, and what do I need to verify before, sometimes you don't necessarily want it to like publicize things before you have the chance to check it, you know?
No, you're right. And you said something a minute ago that it draws all human language. So I would suppose my doctoral dissertation, all the articles I've ever written, my first book, they're all in there.
So I think that, you know, GPT, it's definitely using a lot of like internet sources. Like Brittany had mentioned that our CEO Brittany had mentioned that she was asking it about Flatter Inc., our company, and it came back with things from the website. So sometimes you can say like, oh, this is the source that it was trained on. But what I meant was just that like it takes all of the possible, you know, combination of words and grammar and things that are acceptable and unacceptable, and then kind of uses that as its starting point. And then for like subject matter expertise or, you know, particular topics, it's definitely trained on like internet sources, and I think sometimes even, you know, verified by humans that are kind of data checking, like, oh, is this the correct information that we want the AI model to pick up and learn from?
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that because I'm writing a new book and I've already decided I need to say up front no AI was used in the authorship of this book. And it's kind of interesting that AI is so brand new, but it's already become such interwoven into so much that people now suspect, well, that's really well written. I wonder if he actually wrote it himself. And then the second part, and I go back to my experiment from this morning, I kept putting the title of an organization that I wanted to make a logo for. And I would say, keep everything the same, except change this one thing. And it would come back with a completely different design and still misspelled. So it never spelled it correctly in the 20 odd times I tried. What's going on there?
So pretty much like these algorithms, like the prompting, it'll have a bit of, I think they refer to it as like salt, which is like, okay, how are we seasoning like what you're saying? So if I said like, give me a blue circle, every single time it might have like a slightly different result. And it can be tuned where it's like, okay, don't vary the result at all. And that kind of thing, yeah, it's hard to pin down. I've seen things like make me a hamburger without cheese, and it's always has a slice of cheese. Remove the square that's yellow that looks like cheese. Nope, another cheeseburger, you know.
Yeah,
So
that sounds like my morning this morning.
yeah, it's like which parts do I need to pin down and which parts are like being regenerated. And I think yeah, that's some of the frustration now is that it's, I wouldn't say it's like random output every time, but it's somewhat unpredictable, you know, whether it's
Yeah.
text or an image.
Yeah, what I thought was going to be a very simple query ended up consuming much more time than I thought, and I was locked out. I kept thinking, how could I say this more clearly so that it'll understand, it'll lock down what I like and change what I don't. I wasn't able to figure that out. So it's not plug and play, as we might say. There is a learning curve associated in even the simplest task. And then I heard somebody say a few days ago, if two AI tools begin to talk to one another, they'll create their own language. What's that all about?
I've seen this too, and it's kind of like this, like some people refer to it as like a doomsday kind of scenario where, you know, the AIs begin being autonomous and we can't understand, you know, how they're interacting with each other. I think the idea there is that, you know, why would they use human language to like convey meaning to another artificial intelligence when it could be, you know, more efficient or quicker, or, you know, maybe they're doing it secretly on purpose in this doomsday scenario. But like, yeah, for example, can you and I communicate by blinking and then nobody else knows what we're saying?
Yeah. So is it theoretical or it actually happens?
I think that it's happened in like a lab scenario, but I think that the theoretical part is like that there are AI agents that are kind of autonomously posting and reading and editing data and things that nobody's necessarily monitoring. And I don't think that that's happening quite yet.
Yeah, I guess if you extrapolate this doomsday scenario out, and I'm just thinking off the top of my head, I'm not a doomsdayer, I hope, they could gain access to 3D printers and create weapons and figure out how to use them. Yeah, but that's a long way away. I mean, every time, so I've heard the Shakespeare analogy dozens and dozens of times over my life. And the likelihood of that happening is about the same likelihood as AI taking over the world. To get a monkey to type Shakespeare, as a statistician, the monkey won't live long enough to even get close. I mean, the joke is if you buy 2 lottery tickets, you're twice as likely to win. Yeah, instead of 1 in 18 million, you now have 2 in 18 million. You're still not likely to win. Yeah, AI taking over the world. But I guess there is this risk of becoming over reliant on AI and what do they call them? EMPs, electromagnetic pulse, shutting down all of our GPS, shutting down all of our computers, shutting down all of our AI. I don't know. What are your thoughts on all that as a computer scientist?
I think part of it and part of what we're kind of butting against earlier is like, what is the model optimizing for? So, on the base level, it's optimizing for human language. So it, needs to be grammatically correct. But then it's like, you mentioned, bias and political bias. It's like, okay, once you have a coherent sentence, does that meaning convey, is it meant to persuade somebody? Is it meant to, be factual? And I guess, yeah, like a possible, if we have AI agents, performing autonomously, what are they optimizing for? And you hear that example of like, oh, they're going to say, humans are a detriment to the planet and try to
They're too
destroy it.
slow. They have emotion. They're not rational. Yeah, and that's one of the reasons I think, and again, I'm not an expert, I think we're generations, if ever, away from replicating the human brain and the joys of human life, the emotions of human life. What's the test where we test we test the computer to ask if it's a bot?
The Turing test.
Yeah. The Turing test, a simple test. And AI is getting smart and figuring out how to get around that simple test. But, the ability to replicate yours and my relationship, your mother's and your relationship, my relationship with her, I think we're a long way, if ever. What are you thinking about that? Best friends, AI as a best friend, right? There's some of that going on that kids are staying in the room and talking to bots rather than another human being.
I think, there's one end of the extreme, which is like, what you're describing, like, can an AI, or whether it's by emulating a human brain or just by like its own means, can it, experience things or, have that level of consciousness where it doesn't just know factually, but it might have like an intuition and, a sense of self even. But then you think about like the way that we emote onto stuffed animals and cartoon characters and pets. Like some people consider pets, more so they're members of their family. I mean, everybody that has a pet has that level, but like even more so where it's like, oh, this pet is my child. And nobody would argue, that pet has the same level of consciousness as a child, but on an emotional level, I could see that. There's plenty of people that would agree with that. So it's like, how much do you need to be able to emulate to get, at least close to that emotional connection to like a, live creature, even if it's not another human? And I think we're probably closer to that. Like, our love and relationship is nuanced, but the interactions themselves, it might be like a million interactions. All of those could probably be, held by an AI and understood by an AI. And it's like, maybe they could trick me into thinking an AI is like somebody that I know. So yeah, I guess it's kind of, how much do humans really need to make that leap to say like this is a real entity? And will we ever get, on the technological side, will we get close to the human brain? It's kind of two different questions to me.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of tasks that AI can easily replicate. And then one of the themes that is emerging is human checked. So an AI bot could easily take your temperature and your pulse and several other vital statistics and say, and have a quick conversation with you and say, well, the likelihood is you have a cold as accurately as a human being. I wouldn't say more accurately because there's so many, you said a moment ago, the millions of interactions, but, you can walk into a room, the person never says a word to you, and something's going on, right? That is part of communication that we're a long way away from replicating or being able for an AI bot to even absorb. Because the only way you really have to talk to AI is through typing on a keyboard. I would imagine they could look at your face eventually, but are they going to notice your posture or I don't know, maybe. But the other thing that comes to mind is human beings are the only creature, even plant, that has volition, choice. One of my social science words. We have choice. And as a statistician, one of the biggest mistakes we make predicting for human beings is predicting from a group to an individual. You heard me say that several times. And so, how does AI replicate choice? It comes out with an answer. I guess you could ask it, given these symptoms and these vital statistics, what are the 3 top likelihoods of what's wrong with me today? But still, that doesn't account for the infinite variables, family history. And even then, not to get too macabre, but even this far into the 21st century, medicine is as much as art as it is a science. And how do you replicate art? I know AI is drawing art. Can it replicate your cartoons? Probably pretty accurately, but the love and emotion that you put into them, but you're not going to do that. And going back to the human being, because we talk about this a lot in our coaching and coaching education, we are human beings, and we might not know why we were behaving the way we're behaving or loving what we love. This far into the 21st century, with medicine as much art as it is science, we're finding that getting a catastrophic disease or even avoiding catastrophic disease when you live an unhealthy lifestyle is largely a factor of luck. You might have genetic predispositions to certain things, which would, I guess, be another way of saying family history, or you might be born with a heart murmur, or the vast majority of occurrences are good or bad luck. I talk about, staying in shape and all of that and having a resting heart rate in the 40s. I can't point to any one thing that's any different than anybody else around me that they're doing. You and I are both runners and very different ages, but have very different personalities and very different heart rates and blood pressures and all of that. That's, part of the human experience. So we're a long way away from any of that.
Yeah, I think, the way we think about AI now, you want to know, why did it come up with this answer? Or like what sources did it draw from? Or, if it is reading into a level of intuition about, your posture and your body language and all these things, maybe more factors than we could notice about a person. I would want to know, like, all of those data points, like, even if I can't understand them, like, tell me where you're getting all this information so that I can kind of track your decision making. With a person, it's like you mentioned, like, why do I love X person? Why do I enjoy X experience? There's almost a level of like, you're right as a human being is to not have to justify those things. You don't have to tell the government why you want to marry somebody, or there's this level of respect and dignity that comes with being a human where it's like, maybe nobody can explain their own choices, or I'm not going to have you explain your choices, and we all kind of get along. But with like an agent or a robot, or like a non-sentient thing, I want to know those things, and it doesn't have the same freedom to have the volition that you and I do. So I don't know if it's like a philosophical conversation.
No, it is very much so. I mean, you and I were just joking about this yesterday. You drew me a cartoon from my history as a dairy farmer, and you kept the original. I want the original, but it looks exactly the same as the reproduction. Why do I care? Why do you care? Because there's something inherent in the fact that it's the original. And the same is said for any artwork, any book. That's the reason that I'm inclined and will say on the very first page inside the cover, this was not written with any AI, because I want the reader to know it's my original thought and not created by some bot. And I don't know if we'll ever get away from that. If you watch any Antique Roadshow or Shark Tank or any business encounter, people want to know the story. What's your story? What's the story of this piece? And the story will increase its value. It goes back to the fundamentals of economics. And one of the fundamentals of economics is the value that you as an individual place on something. And it might be a guitar, a child, a spouse, and no one other than you can define that value. And, they say the heart loves who the heart wants. And if the other person isn't reciprocating in the value you're laying on that person, then the relationship's probably not going to work out. That's why a lot of us, when we're young, running around all heart sick because we had aspirations for a particular partner that they didn't have for us. Never happened to me. I dated one woman my entire life. Been married to her for 40 years now. Well, that concludes this episode of Building a Coaching Culture. I truly hope that this episode was helpful to you. If it was, be sure to follow us wherever you listen to podcasts. Maybe stop and give us a rating or a review, and share this podcast with someone who might find it helpful as well. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.